There is a special type of death row inmate in the American criminal justice system. They are not crying out for justice, no appeal. There's no begging for life. They only want one thing: to die. In the legal world, these people are called volunteers, those who voluntarily step onto the executioner's block. Norman Grimm Jr. is one of them. As the 1998 murder trial moved to the sentencing phase, the record noted an unusual detail. The defendant refused to allow his lawyer to present any mitigating evidence. Grimm was convicted of first-degree murder and sexual assault against 41-year-old Cynthia Campbell. But he didn't care. The psychology of people like Grimm isn't as complex as people think. When they realized they would spend the rest of their lives in prison, they simply chose death as a quicker escape. This is not a rare occurrence. Many death row inmates have waived their right to appeal, urging the state to execute them as soon as possible. Some forensic psychologists believe this is the final act of control by those who have lost control of their lives. The victim in this case is not an ordinary person. Cynthia Campbell is a lawyer. Her profession means having many enemies, those who lost lawsuits and those who resent being sent to prison by her. But none of those enemies killed her. And it was the man who lived right next door. Morning of July 27, 1998, East Milton, Florida, a quiet suburb north of Pensacola Beach. Around 5 a.m., just as the sky was turning pink, a loud noise woke Cynthia Campbell. A metal nut, a lug nut, flew through her house window, shattering the glass. She immediately called the police. Perhaps this is an act of revenge from one of her professional enemies, or simply meaningless vandalism. No one knows. When the police arrived, a man from the house next door stepped over. He said his 3 dogs were barking loudly, waking him up. That's Norman Grimm Jr., Cynthia's neighbor. He asked about her, expressing concern, and then invited Cynthia over for coffee. She politely declined. I still have some things to sort out with the police officer. But then, while she and the police officer were inside the house examining the scene, a loud explosion went off outside, almost like a gunshot. They ran out and discovered a large tree branch had just broken and fallen right onto Cynthia's car, denting the roof. A bad morning is getting worse. Norman Grimm reappeared, and then he asked again, and again, showing interest. And this time, as the police officer was about to leave, he invited Cynthia over for coffee again, perhaps because of exhaustion, perhaps out of politeness, or simply because a cup of coffee sounds warm after the recent string of troubles. Cynthia nodded in agreement. That was the final decision of her life. Cynthia Campbell had an appointment at 7 a.m. that day, an important meeting with the accountant about her law office's business. For someone as meticulous as Cynthia, being late is unimaginable. She's always on time, always prepare thoroughly, always put work first. But that morning, she didn't show up. The accountant is waiting. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, no phone. There is no explanation. In this woman's mind, the image of Cynthia, a strong, decisive woman who never keeps anyone waiting, began to pile up with a sense of unease. Half an hour later, at 8 a.m., Cynthia had another appointment with her secretary and legal assistant. She still hasn't arrived. At this moment, the accountant knew something was wrong. That's not good at all. She drove to Cynthia's house. The scene before her made her heart clench. The front door was wide open. The lights in the house are still on. Cynthia's car, still dented from the morning branch, sat motionless in the yard. The accountant entered. Cynthia? The call echoed through the empty house. No response. There was only the cold light and the terrifying silence. She went from room to room, living room, bedroom, kitchen. There's no trace of Cynthia Campbell. The secretary also came. The two women searched together, calling out names, hoping for some reasonable explanation. But there isn't. They called the police. And then, once again, the neighbor appeared. Norman Grimm Jr. Standing there, he curiously asked what was happening. The police arrived at the scene. They filed a missing person report. But with the door open, the lights on, and the car still there, Cynthia couldn't have gone far. The police officer's eyes swept over the house next door, where Norman Grimm was standing and observing. Would you be suitable if we looked at the house and the surrounding area? Grimm hesitated. His face briefly showed discomfort. The police immediately noticed that, a suspicious sign. But then, Grimm nodded. Okay. Inside the Grimm house, the police saw black marks on the floor. There's nothing too suspicious. There's no blood. There were no signs of a struggle. But on the shorts Grimm was wearing, they found reddish-brown stains. They checked his car. Still nothing, until they asked about the trunk. I don't have the trunk key, Grimm said. Who doesn't have their own trunk key? Then something strange happened. Grimm's 3 dogs suddenly got out and ran down the road. Grimm shouted that he had to chase them. The police followed for a while but lost track and did not continue the pursuit. They went back to Grimm's house to wait for him to return, but he never came back. A witness later testified that she saw Norman Grimm's car parked near the Pensacola Bay fishing pier. The trunk is wide open. He miraculously found the key. 2 hours later, a man fishing under the bridge felt something heavy snag on his hook. He pulled it up and discovered that the hook was caught in the corpse of a woman. The body was wrapped in bed sheets, tied with rope, covered in garbage bags, and sealed with duct tape. The victim was identified as 41-year-old Cynthia Campbell. Death found her in the very house next door, where she thought she was just going for a cup of coffee. The search warrant has been issued. When investigators entered Norman Grimm's home with full legal authority, they found a complete picture of the crime. Not isolated clues, not vague evidence, but the whole story is written in blood and evidence. The bedsheet wrapped around Cynthia's body matches perfectly with the rest of Grimm's bedroom bedding. Was the rope tied tightly around the victim's wrists and ankles? The same type of coils are in his warehouse. Cynthia's mouth taped. Same brand, same roll in the kitchen drawer. Black trash bags wrapped around a dead body. Same brand as Grimm's kitchen cabinet bag box. But that was just the beginning. Cynthia Campbell's glasses, which her relatives insisted she never took off, were found under the sofa in Grimm's living room. And then, the decisive evidence: DNA. Cynthia's blood was found on the kitchen floor and in his dining area. The bloodstains had been wiped away, but forensic technology in 1998 was sophisticated enough to detect them. The forensic report is one of the most difficult documents to read in the case file. Cynthia Campbell was struck in the head 18 times with a hard object, most likely the claw hammer recovered from the scene. Her skull was broken in many places. But that's still not enough. She was stabbed at least 11 times, including 7 times directly into her heart. On her left hand, there were defensive wounds, signs that she had tried to fight back to survive. And the most brutal detail, her genitals were slashed with a knife. There are clear signs that Cynthia was sexually assaulted. This is not the act of a cold, calculated killer. This is an explosion of uncontrolled violence. 18 hammer blows, 11 stab wounds. This speaks of complete loss of control, the frenzy of a person who has completely unleashed the animal instincts within. While the police were piecing together the final pieces of the case, Norman Grimm disappeared. He knew that everything was over. 1998 is no longer the 70s or 80s. DNA, fingerprints, modern forensics, all of these are against the criminal. Today, with surveillance cameras every place, facial recognition, and mobile tracking, escape is almost impossible. But criminals continue to commit crimes. Perhaps some of them knew they would be caught, but they still chose to live out their dark fantasies, regardless of the consequences. 3 days after Cynthia Campbell died, Norman Grimm was arrested in Watonga, Oklahoma, the small town where his father lived. The defense attorney tried their best. They argued that Cynthia had many enemies. She's a lawyer. Of course she has enemies. She received many threats. Perhaps one of those people killed her. The jury didn't take long to dismiss that theory. The evidence is too clear. The truth is too obvious. Upon further investigation, the police discovered that Norman Grimm Jr., not a first-time offender. He has a long and extensive history with the criminal justice system. From 1983 to 1990, Grimm was imprisoned for a series of serious crimes: armed robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. 7 years in prison, 7 years for rehabilitation. But when he got out of prison, he hadn't learned anything. Grimm moved to Texas, and there he robbed another store, arrested again, back in prison again. But the justice system gave him another chance. He was released on conditional bail. Grimm requested to transfer guardianship to Florida and was approved. In 1998, when he killed Cynthia Campbell, Norman Grimm was still on parole. The question is, are there people who cannot be reformed? There are those who are born to destroy, no matter how many chances you give them. The case of Norman Grimm seems to be an affirmative answer. Some forensic psychologists believe there are individuals with severe antisocial personality disorder. No conscience, no empathy, no sense of consequences. For them, the reintegration program is just a waiting period until their next crime. The trial of Norman Grimm proceeded with a full array of forensic evidence, witnesses, and exhibits. The jury didn't take long to conclude. Guilty of first-degree murder and sexual assault, punishment, death penalty. But something unusual happened during the sentencing phase, the stage where defense attorneys typically present mitigating factors such as an unhappy childhood, mental health issues, or family circumstances. Norman Grimm refused. He doesn't want the lawyer to do that. He wants to die. If I had to live in prison for the rest of my life, I'd rather be dead. This is not a rare phenomenon in the American death penalty system. These condemned prisoners were called volunteers. They waived their right to appeal. They urged the authorities to execute them faster. From 1976 to the present, over 140 death row inmates in the United States have voluntarily waived their appeals and accepted their deaths. Some feel guilty and want to pay the price, but for the most part, like Grimm, they simply couldn't bear the thought of living in captivity for the rest of their lives. This raises a complex ethical dilemma. Should the state enforce the death penalty on someone who wants to die? Is that a punishment or a release? Some legal scholars argue that the purpose of punishment is deterrence and retribution. But if the criminal welcomes death, then neither purpose is achieved. But for the victim's family, these philosophical debates are not important. Cynthia Campbell, a talented 41-year-old lawyer with her whole life ahead of her, died on a fateful morning simply because of a cup of coffee with her neighbor. Justice can be enforced. The murderer could receive a sentence, but Cynthia will never come back. And that's the real tragedy of every murder case. No matter what the law does, the victim is lost forever.